Hello, Math 133 students. In this video, I'm going to go over the sample size flow chart from Chapter 11. So, of course, we've learned a lot of formulas for sample size, and sample size, of course, is something your calculator doesn't do for you, so we're really going to have to know. Now, the one thing to watch out for is you want to look for the question words of how many or what sample size. It'll mention confidence intervals in the problem, but don't be fooled. Look for the question words because they'll say how many to construct a confidence interval. So they don't actually want you to construct the confidence interval. What they want is to know how large a sample they need to construct that confidence interval. So beware that these are not confidence interval questions, these are sample size questions. So look for the keywords of sample size or how many. Okay, now we've learned several formulas, almost all of them having to do with proportions, to be perfectly honest. So for this one up here, you're going to look for percents, proportions, survey, but it's going to have, it's for one proportion, for one population or group or population with a past estimate. So you have something from the past, some guess from before. That would be p hat 1 minus p hat z alpha over 2 over the error squared. Now, if you have the same thing, a percent, a proportion, survey for one group, but with no prior guess, so with no past estimate, right? No guess from the past as to what p hat might be, then you'd use 0.25 z alpha over 2 over the error squared. They're actually the same formula. If you have no guess, you use 50-50. So you put 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5 times 0.5 would be 0.25. So it works out. Now, these are both from section 9.4. Technically, they're really 9.1, but we put them in 9.4. In the green packet, they're on page 300, and they're in the third box down, right? So third box, fourth box. So 1, 2, right? First box, second box, third box on the left, third box on the right. So this is page 300, third on the left, and then this is page 300, oops, third box, but on the right. Both of which are using the critical values. Matter of fact, all of them use the same critical values. So I'm just going to go over critical values one time. Critical values are found with, it's the z alpha over 2. So z alpha over 2 is found with, and you could technically do plus or minus. It doesn't really make any difference because you square them every time anyway. But you find it with either inverse norm, alpha over 2, comma 0, comma 1, or the bottom row of the t-table. And that's actually the same critical value for every single one of these. They all use z alpha over 2. That's why all the rest of the lines are small. So they all are z alpha over 2s all the way down. So the way to find them is either inverse norm alpha over 2, comma 0, comma 1, or the bottom row of the t-table. All right, so those are the two that are for proportions for one population. We learned those in section 9.4. Technically, they're both 9.1. And then this one's really 9.2, but I moved them all out of those sections just to make things go easier. So the one that's different is this one. This was 9.4 also. Again, it's really 9.2. It was page 300. It's the fourth box at the very bottom. So if I pull up page 300, it's right here. This one. Right? So you can see it's really 9.2 and 9.1. I think that actually might be more helpful because this is really a 9.2 question. And I might not keep that as a separate section forever. So this is section 9.1, and this was section 9.1. That's where they really come from. All right, so although in the notes they're in 9.4, so I guess you could put 9.4 underneath it, right? And then underneath this one, you could say 9.4, 9.4. There you go. All right, so the formula is n equals z alpha over 2 times s over the error squared. Now this one's the one that's going to be obvious from a mile away because it's going to talk about how many, what sample size, but it's going to mention average, mean. It'll have a standard deviation in the problem somewhere because there's an S in the formula. So standard deviation will be mentioned, that kind of thing. Standard deviation will be given in the problem. So that'll be a sign. If you see standard, none of the rest of these have standard deviations. If you see a standard deviation that's a sample size question, this is the one. This is the only one. The rest of them are all for proportions. This one's the only one that'll have mean mentioned and standard deviation given, right? So it'll talk about these two. So these will be mentioned, but the standard deviation will be straight up in the problem somewhere. All right, now back to proportions. So we enjoyed means for a minute. Now it's back to proportions. But these two are the proportions from chapter 11. So again, we're going to look for percent, proportion, you know, all that jazz. But this is going to be for two groups, two separate independent groups with past estimates for each group, for P1 hat and P2 hat, right? So it's P1 hat, 1 minus P1 hat, plus P2 hat, 1 minus P2 hat. So you have some past data, some old survey, right? Surveys are another thing, right? So they'll have some old survey, some old poll that gets these ones. And then it's times Z alpha over 2 over the error squared, right? But it'll be two separate independent groups. We learned this in section 11.1. It's on page 303. So I grab 303. It's in the bottom box on the left, right? So bottom left. As opposed to 11.1, this is page 303. This is going to be the bottom right. Now this one's when you have two separate independent groups, so that's chapter 11, but you have past guesses. This one's going to be percents and proportions, surveys, whatever. Surveys or polls, they'll mention polls, same thing. But it's for two separate independent groups, two separate independent groups with no past estimates available. So that'd be 0.5 times Z alpha over 2 over the error squared. Right. Now 0.25. 0.25 is when you're doing a single group from chapter 9. So no, single group, no guess is 0.25. Two groups, no guess is 0.5. One other thing I want to make a note of, these two, it's always N1 and N2. So it's N1 and N2 are here. N1 and N2. That's a 1. In other words, it's for each of the groups for these two. Right, and same thing with this. It's N1 equals, oh, sorry, my 1 got lost there. It's N1 equals N2. It's both groups. Each one of them has to have this many people. So if you're talking about like group 1 and group 2, I need, if I found 1,000 here, pretend. If this is 1,000, I need 1,000 for group 1 and 1,000 for group 2. I need 1,000 for Tylenol and 1,000 for Advil. I need 1,000 for each separate group for both of these two down here because they're chapter 11.